Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Vaughan. Welcome to beautiful Woodbridge. So happy to be here today, standing alongside my beautiful wife, Utilia, in our home community. We live just a few minutes south of here. This is the community that I've had the honor of living in for more than 3 decades, and it's the community that Utilia and I decided to live in after getting married and to raise our kids in. And speaking of our kids, of course, we just dropped them off at school a short while ago. As many of you have heard me say repeatedly, our daughters attend publicly funded schools right here in Woodbridge. Talia, our older daughter, in grade 9, Grace, our younger daughter, in grade 5. And so that's why today's announcement is so very important to me, and it's important to Utilia, and it's important to Ontario Liberals, because getting publicly funded education right, making the right kind of investment in our schools to set all of our kids and our frontline education workers up for success is one of the most important responsibilities that an Ontario Premier has. And frankly, we've seen over the past 4 years, both before the pandemic struck and then during the pandemic, that the Ford Conservatives simply don't get it. You'll all remember the strife that we saw, the disruptions that we saw in our schools across this province prior to the pandemic, when Doug Ford and his team decided to come out with mandatory online classes, growing class sizes, all of that disruption that made life so much more difficult for our kids, for kids across this province, and for frontline education workers. And then the pandemic struck. And we saw, not only did we feel this in our own household, with kids, our kids being isolated from their friends, trying so hard to learn online. It was such a tough time, still is a tough time, because there is a significant amount of what I like to call learning or education recovery that needs to be done in this province in order to make sure that our kids don't fall further and further behind. And imagine my shock, our shock, a number of weeks ago when we learned that while thousands of families whose kids attend public schools were struggling to access rapid tests, that we heard the Ford Conservatives had prioritized rapid tests to be sent out to private schools. This is one example. Last Thursday's budget, that budget from the Ford Conservatives that has no plan, that budget contained a $1.3 billion cut to publicly funded education. That's $1.3 billion that they had previously budgeted to invest in public schools like the one that that we are standing in front of right now. And they chose with all of the harm that we've seen in public schools because of their lack of commitment to public education, they chose to cut that from this budget. This is, when I talk about a choice in this election, this issue of who's going to build up versus who's going to undermine and cut public education goes right to the heart of the choice that sits in front of the people of Ontario. Yesterday you heard me say that if elected, Ontario Liberals will cancel Highway 413 and will invest $10 billion in public schools across this province, repairing them and building new ones in communities like Woodbridge and communities right across the province of Ontario. And today, to once again highlight how committed I am, how committed we are to publicly funded education, I'm excited to announce that if elected, Ontario Liberals will shrink class sizes and put a hard cap on both elementary and secondary schools of 20 students per class. 20 students per class. And why are we going to do that? We're going to do that because we experienced this firsthand. It was so tough for our kids to try to learn through screens last year. We know it was difficult. We know it impacted their mental health. And I've heard this story from moms and dads right across this province of Ontario. So we're going to shrink class sizes, a hard cap of 20. And in order to do that, we're going to hire 10,000 new teachers across the province of Ontario. About 6,500 of those teachers in elementary, about 3,500 in secondary, to bring the class size down to 20. Again, I want to stress a hard cap of 20 so that students and their teachers can connect with one another, so that students can be taught, but so that the teachers can also reach the students. And speaking of reaching students, I think we learned in our household, families across this province learned. Clearly, Doug Ford and his team didn't learn, because just this past February, they issued a memo or a directive out to Ontario's public school boards to say that the mandatory online classes will continue. How appalling is that? With the struggles that our kids and our educators went through over the past 2 years, that the Ford Conservatives have decided to double down on what was a mistake in the first instance and insist that mandatory online learning remain in place. Ontario Liberals, if elected, will also change that. We will once again make online courses optional or voluntary for students. So again, we're going to invest $10 billion over the next 5 years in repairing and building new schools. We're going to shrink, put a hard cap of class sizes of 20 for both elementary and secondary. We're going to hire up 10,000 new teachers to help us meet this goal. And we're going to scrap mandatory online learning because, again, teachers need to teach, but they also need to be able to reach their students, students like our daughters. This is another key component of the Ontario Liberal plan to help our kids recover, to help our kids thrive. This is something that will be fundamentally important to me because of our experiences with our own daughters and certainly from the stories that I've heard from Ontario families through the past 2 years. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, everyone. We'll be taking questions from the floor first. One question, one follow-up, and then we'll move to folks on the line.
So the Liberals' history with teachers is a little bumpy. I remember back when there were strikes going on due to a wage freeze. Is that something that you'll commit to not doing again?
Well, what I've committed to all the way through is open, free, and fair collective bargaining. This is something that is core to me as someone who spent time before being an MPP working for a labor union. I believe that that's the way you get the best result. That's one of the reasons that if elected, we will immediately repeal Bill 124, the legislation that Doug Ford rammed through the legislature before the pandemic that takes away the opportunity for many of our frontline workers, including in education, to bargain freely and fairly. So I respect the bargaining process, and that's where I believe when it's free and fair and open, that's where you get the best results. But again, we're going to hire up 10,000 new teachers. We're going to deliver a hard cap in elementary and secondary of 20 students, and we're going to scrap mandatory online learning.
There were also calls back in the day for a moratorium on school closures, and I know you're committed to opening a lot of schools, but what do you think about a moratorium?
Yeah, no school closures under a Del Duca Liberal government. Thank you.
Morning, Stephen.
Morning, Rob.
So hard cap, for those of us who don't cover education all the time, does that mean like this is not an average? This is
No, this is a hard.
Every class is no more than 20?
That's correct. That's why we're calling it the hard cap, because you're right. Historically, it's been an average where it fluctuates a little bit up and down, but it's so important for, I believe, for our kids to be able to get that instruction and that attention from their teachers. We will deliver a hard cap of 20.
Okay, and I always ask, what's the price tag?
We estimate the price tag, and we budgeted a price tag of about $1 billion to be able to deliver on this. And again, as I have said before, when you see our platform released over the next several days, you will see that it is fully costed, balanced, and responsible.
Morning, Stephen.
Morning.
So both you and the NDP are proposing sort of similar ideas on cutting class sizes, hiring more teachers. So if Doug Ford wins a minority government, would you consider working with the NDP on some type of coalition or confidence in supply agreement?
So my understanding is that the NDP platform calls for reducing class sizes, but only for the earliest grades, the elementary grades. I just want to stress, I think an important differentiator here is that our commitment is a hard cap in both elementary and secondary all the way through of 20. And that's why we require the additional teachers that I've referenced a second ago. On the broader question, look, I've said this now for many, many months. My plan, and the reason that I'm working so hard and our team is working so hard, is to deliver real progress for the people of Ontario. If that means that come June the 2nd, the people of Ontario have asked all of us, regardless of partisan stripe, to work together, excuse me, then I will do whatever I can to find a way to do that. What I have said in the past as well, though, is I have watched closely over the past 4 years, and I know, like I believe most Ontarians know, Doug Ford doesn't have the capacity to lead this province. That doesn't mean that there aren't people, perhaps here in my home community, who might have voted Conservative in the past, who might share my passion to invest in public education. If that's true, and I believe it is, then I'm prepared to work with anyone who wants smaller class sizes and economic dignity and a seniors care revolution and a fight or a plan to fight the climate crisis, and the list goes on from there. For me, it's not about the politics, it's about the progress. So I'd be happy to work with anyone who wants to deliver, in this case, for example, a hard cap of 20 for elementary and secondary classes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Math scores across the province are terrible. EQAO testing has gone kind of sideways. PCs have said they'll kind of fix it, and change it to digital. What's your plan to fix terrible math scores across the province, and what would you do with the EQAO testing?
So first of all, it's shocking for me to hear in the setup to your question that Conservatives would claim that somehow they've got a plan to fix this. When you cut $1.3 billion from the education budget, that's, by the way, that's our money that was earmarked to be invested in public education. And after what we've gone through and our kids have gone through, you cut $1.3 billion, you cannot with a clear conscience tell people that you have any kind of reasonable plan for public education. I think many of you will also remember way back in 2018, Doug Ford chose to take a losing Conservative candidate and appoint him, I believe it was to be chair of the EQAO system. Again, politicizing something that is so fundamentally important. When we release the rest of our education platform, you will see details in there about how we believe it's time to review and update the entire EQAO process, because I think that it's something that came in many years ago. I don't think that it is well suited to where we find ourselves right now, especially with the learning loss that we've had during this pandemic. And that's why I think, drawing upon the best minds that we have in education here in Ontario, we should be able to create and then deliver upon a made in Ontario way to assess the pandemic-related learning gaps and then find ways to fill those gaps. One of the most important ways to fill the gaps is to lower class sizes. When you create a hard cap of 20 in elementary and secondary, and you have enough teachers in the system helping you to deliver that, that gives your kids the one-on-one attention and instruction they need to recover because of this pandemic. But you certainly don't do it the way that Doug Ford and his team are determined to do it, cutting public education, forcing mandatory online courses down the throats of people and families and kids in high schools. That's not how you do it. And frankly, the way that the Ford Conservatives have disrespected and underfunded public education is not pandemic limited. This assault on public education from the Ford Conservatives began long before the pandemic. And families right here in Woodbridge and across Ontario felt it, they understand it, and they know they cannot count on Doug Ford or the Conservatives to invest in public education, but Ontario Liberals will, and that's a very clear choice in this election. Backwards, with underfunding and undermining and disrespecting public education, from the Ford Conservatives, forward with the Ontario Liberals, who will lower class sizes, hire more teachers, and scrap mandatory online courses.
Thank you. We'll move to folks on the line now. All right, just a reminder for folks on the line to raise their hand if you have a question. I see Colin DeMello. We can unmute. Randy Rapp? Sorry, we're having some technical difficulties on our end. Go ahead, Siobhan Morse.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, perfect. So yesterday you talked about this, your pitch to build 200 new schools and prepare for 500, which I think we thought was to deal with, schools that were in poor condition, falling apart. There will be schools now that can't accommodate a hard cap of 20 because they just have too many students to do that. So is there, the 200 new schools you're planning to build, does that take into consideration that there may be spots where kids have nowhere to go if you're imposing that hard cap?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it does. In fact, it does. The $10 billion over 5 years that we would be investing in public education by scrapping Doug Ford's Highway 413, that would include, and we've accommodated within that budgeting, the idea that we might need to add some space in order to deliver on the hard cap. So we have thought about that, and that's part of our plan.
And the hard cap, how quickly might parents see that instituted fully?
Well, it's something that will have the full weight of the Premier's office and of the Premier should we win on June the 2nd. So it is something that will be contained in mandate letters. By the way, mandate letters that we will make open so everyone can see them, not hide them the way that the Ford Conservatives have. It'll be clear in the mandate letter for the new Minister of Education. This is an urgent thing that needs to be delivered, but we also recognize that it will take a little bit of time. So that's why we will prioritize the schools in the neighborhoods that have the greatest challenges. For example, the schools where the class sizes are the largest, or the schools in priority neighborhoods that have been hardest hit during this pandemic. So we'll assess that, but we will hit the ground running, and it will be a priority for me as Premier and our new Minister of Education.
Thank you very much. We'll go to Jeff Gray at the Globe and Mail.
Hi, Stephen. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
I just wanted to ask about that $1.3 billion figure from the budget, which has been brought up a number of times. Yep. In the budget, that number is explained as a projected underspend that the government says is due to a whole bunch of things, some of which have to do with the fact that the schools were closed. So a decline in revenue from things like fundraising that schools would normally do when they were open, community use of schools. The schools weren't open for sports and other uses. They didn't need to spend money there. They didn't have international students, and they had lower than projected enrollment. So you make it sound like they went in there with scissors and cut, but this actually is, you know, they're funded per student. They had fewer students, so the number came in lower than the government had anticipated. Are you distorting that number a bit?
No, not at all. You know, governing is about choices, just like election campaigns are about choices. And the Ford Conservatives had a choice over the past year when they saw, for example, that perhaps enrollment numbers were dropping. They had a choice. And the choice was to say, you know what, we get it. We know that public education is core to what we have to do in this province, and we have to get it right. So they had a choice to say, regardless of enrollment numbers, we're going to continue to invest what we originally budgeted so we can help set our kids up for success. For example, they could have used that $1.3 billion to bring in more special needs professionals. They could have used it to start delivering better ventilation in schools like the schools our daughters attend. They could have brought in more mental health care professionals. We know kids who've been isolated from their friends over the past 2 years it's really had a tough toll on their mental health. So governing is about choices, Jeff, but so are elections. And you can count on me and a new Ontario Liberal government to consistently invest in the right way in public education. And let me just say one other thing, because I also read that paragraph in the budget. And as someone who, along with my wife, again, we have kids in the system, I found it shocking and frankly despicable that Doug Ford decided, in essence, to include blaming parents for not stepping up to do as much fundraising in the community in our schools for their decision to make this cut. If you read that language, this notion that there were fewer fundraising activities feels like parents and families are being blamed in some respects because they don't have a commitment to public education. So, look, as Premier, I'm going to make sure that we are investing. I'm going to make sure that we have class sizes in elementary and secondary of 20. We're going to get rid of the reckless highway Doug Ford is obsessed with building. We're going to take that money and invest it in repairing and building new schools. We'll have more special needs professionals, more mental health professionals, and we're going to make sure that our public schools in this province, there are about roughly 5,000, and we're going to build 200 more, that our public schools in this province are state-of-the-art, they're modern, they're safe, the air is safe to breathe, the water is safe to drink. We're going to focus on delivering that kind of progress in public education, and everybody in Ontario knows Doug Ford never will because he doesn't care about it.
Thanks. And a follow-up about, I haven't seen the details of your proposal about when you'd get these caps in place. There seems to be a lot of concern about getting enough teachers. Yep. You said 10,000 teachers. I mean, it was the Liberal government that actually made moves to limit. We're gonna have trouble getting that number of teachers. Do you acknowledge that? And it's going to take some time, isn't it, to get to this level?
Yeah, for sure it's going to take some time. That's why, as I said just a moment ago, we will start off by prioritizing the schools where the class sizes are the highest, where they have skyrocketed under Doug Ford, especially in the neighborhoods that have been hardest hit during this pandemic because of Doug Ford's reckless cuts in public education. With respect to the teachers, 10,000 is a big number, but it is the right number to get us to where we need to be on a hard cap of 20. We know in this province right now that there are roughly 80,000 teachers who've been certified by the College of Teachers who are not currently working in the publicly funded system. part of our responsibility is to encourage those women and men to come back to public education. And here's one of the ways you do it: by having a premier who respects public education and respects educators and repeals Bill 124 and talks about partnership and collaboration instead of dictating from on high the way that Ford and his team have in education and in so many other areas over the past 4 years. I am convinced, and I've certainly heard this feedback from those who work on the front lines of education, when they feel respected, when they have the ability to bargain fairly and freely, when they believe that we are truly partners in education, they want to teach. They want to be in the public system. It is a vocation for the people who take up teaching as a profession, and Ontario Liberals will use these mechanisms and this notion of respecting their work to get us to where we have the 10,000 that are required to deliver on the hard cap.
Next question, we have Richard Southern.
Hi, Stephen. Good morning.
Morning, Richard.
Since we're talking about education, I just wanted to get your take on this. I'm looking at a tweet from your Ajax candidate, Amber Bowen, dated February 24th, 2020. She's replying to a tweet from Miss Kathleen Wynne. Miss Wynne is taking issue in her tweet with the Ford government's education record, and Miss Bowen replies to Miss Wynne saying, quote, "You caused so much harm to students in your time as premier, quote, you lost for a reason." Wondering what you think about one of your candidates taking issue with your party's prior education record, sir.
Well, first of all, I know Amber Bowen really well. She is someone who is a frontline educator, someone who has been a leader with in Ajax. She has a family. She has young kids. She knows, as an educator and as a mom, what needs to be done in publicly funded education, and she is working so hard. All of this, these are some of the reasons that I have great confidence that Amber Bowen will be an exceptional MPP for the community of Ajax. That community needs a strong local MPP who understands their concerns. Amber is someone who is passionate about publicly funded education. In fact, she and many of our other candidates, and we have candidates, by the way, like Amber, who are frontline educators, current and retired principals, people who have experience as school trustees. So it is the team, including Amber, who've helped me and our campaign team develop an education platform that I believe is second to none. So that's why I can stand here with confidence and say delivering a hard cap of 20 students in elementary and secondary is something that I know will deliver real progress in schools in Ajax and schools right here in Vaughan, in Woodbridge. And so I'm delighted that Amber is running for us. She is passionate about this, and I want that passion. I want that experience. I want that dedication, because that's how Ontario Liberals, if and when we form government, will deliver progress in education.
Stephen, the NDP are already taking issue with your announcement this morning, saying that the last time the Liberal government was in power, that it let class sizes balloon. I'm wondering if you can respond to that, please.
It's good to see that, if nothing else, the NDP is consistent so far in this campaign. Again, as I said when I talked about Buck a Ride province-wide a few days ago, you would think that people who tell us that they're progressive would want to be able to work to deliver the kind of progress that people need. This is true on transit fares from a couple of days ago. It's true today with respect to delivering a hard cap on class sizes of 20 and hiring up the teachers we need and scrapping mandatory online courses. I suspect that if you knocked on the doors in this community right here in Woodbridge, where there are many young families who have kids that attend St. Stephen's and the other schools in this neighborhood, they would tell you that they care a little bit less about partisanship and a little bit less about traditional politics where people throw mud at one another, and they just want to know that the school right here that their kids go to is functioning properly. You know, that the air is safe to breathe and the water is safe to drink, and that the teachers have what they need in smaller classes, smaller class sizes, in order to deliver on math and English and history and science and everything else that we want our kids to learn. So, look, the NDP will continue to play their games, and the Conservatives will continue to play their games. I guess they're going to keep focusing on me and Ontario Liberals. We will remain fixed on the future of this province. We will be focused on delivering real progress, forward-looking, with determination and hope and optimism. Today we're talking about education. There's more to come. They're going to focus on me. I'm going to focus on the 15 million people who call this province home.
Thank you. We'll go to Natasha next on the line.
Hi, I want to ask you about online learning. So the Ford government mandated TVO and TFO to manage online learning in public schools. this has drawn particular criticism from the French school boards because they want autonomy in that management. So what would a Liberal government do on that file?
So first of all, we're going to scrap the mandatory online courses. We think it was, I know firsthand, it was a mistake when Doug Ford and his team came up with it prior to the pandemic. And I just want to repeat what I said earlier today. The fact that just this past February, just a couple of months ago or a few months ago, they decided, despite how difficult it was for our kids to try to learn through a screen for the past couple of years during COVID, Doug Ford and his team decided to double down on a mistake. They're insisting, this past February, that mandatory online courses must continue. So number one, Ontario Liberals will scrap the mandatory feature or the mandatory idea for these online courses. Secondly, what I've heard from frontline educators, including those who teach in our French boards, all the way through, French language boards, all the way through, is that they want to be real partners in this conversation. They want to collaborate. They do have direct expertise. And I love TVO and I love TFO. Fantastic. But we have real education experience in this province. And we should be bringing those educators in, the people who do understand what it takes on the front lines of schools like the two that we are standing beside right here today in Woodbridge. They know what works inside of a classroom. We should be drawing on that experience rather than dictating from on high. And I will also say, as a father, I am gravely concerned that the way that the Ford Conservatives have tried to move in education, like so much else that they do around mandatory online and bringing in, it's about allowing creeping privatization into our core public services. They're trying to do it in healthcare, I'm convinced. I believe they've been trying to do it over the past 4 years in public education because they only look at education like it's a cost. Education is an investment. Public education is the great leveler and the great equalizer in this province of ours. It's also good economic policy. Every dollar that we invest in the right way in public education returns $1.30 back to our economy. The fact that Doug Ford doesn't get that is absolutely shocking to me. It's one of the reasons that I can tell you, and I repeatedly say this, he is not qualified to lead this province and he doesn't have the capacity to be premier.
Okay, but just to be clear, if you're elected, will TFO still be mandated to manage online courses?
No.
Okay.
All right, that's it for questions on the line. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.